Good morning, you guys. It's your boy Bill Mahari here, representing Mahari Nation Sports Podcast. Much love to the entire LDBC and the basketball community. If you want more basketball content, tune in to Basketball Conversations every Friday night, 9 p.m. Central Time. This is where we discuss basketball-related topics, news, debates, and everything else in the world of basketball. If you are new to the channel, make sure to hit the subscribe button, hit the bell icon to get all the latest notifications when I start dropping videos and live stream. And please spread the word about the channel. If you want to donate to the channel, I'll post in the PayPal and Cash App links underneath the description box if you want to donate any money to the value of this channel. So with all that out the way, let's get down to business, shall we? Now, I did a video last month in relating to about the myth of the bad boy Pistons, okay? This one, however, is going to be a tad bit different, okay? This is still going to rob about the Detroit Pistons, but it's going to revolve around about the reconstruction of the Detroit Pistons post-bad boy era, okay? Now, when you look back at that Detroit team back in the day, okay, pretty much at that time in 91, all right, when they got swept by the Bulls, let's think about the three core players here, okay, which is Joe Dumars, Isaiah Thomas, Dennis Rodman, you know what I'm saying? Those three guys, okay? Now, Isaiah Thomas at that time was 29 years old in 91, okay? Joe Dumars was 27. Dennis Rodman was 29, okay? Now, the year after the 92 season, Chuck Daly was pretty much done with the team because he pretty much felt that the era came to an end, that he pretty much didn't want to go through a rebuilding process. So he pretty much said that it was time to go and ended up going to New Jersey. Now, when you look back at that those two remaining years between 93 and 94, okay, they had Ron Rothstein as head coach, who didn't do too bad. You know what I mean? We led him to 40 wins, but pretty much that wasn't going to be enough to save his job. Okay. Now, after that year, okay, already Mark Aguirre was already gone. Bill Laimbeer retired. Okay. And so you've already lost two of your main core players, and pretty much Dennis Rodman's antics was becoming much more of a major distraction because the loss of his influence, Chuck Daly, and he ended up traded to the San Antonio Spurs. Now, when you look back at that year, okay, now they did make a good trade with the Miami Heat. They actually traded John Sally back in 92 and ended up getting two first-round picks, okay, during that 93 draft class, okay? That 93 draft class that's well remembered by the Orlando Magic winning the draft lottery out of one ping pong ball from 66. Still one of the most shocking, draft lottery moments in NBA history. So, when I look back at that 93 draft class, okay, the Detroit Pistons actually didn't draft too badly. They drafted Lindsey Hunter from Jackson State, okay? And with their 11th pick, they actually drafted Allan Houston. You know, that great New York Knicks player? Yep, he got drafted by the Detroit Pistons, okay? Now, heading into that 93-94 year, Isaiah was pretty much at his wits' end. He was pretty much felt like he was done. Now, you could make the argument that Isaiah retired pretty much prematurely because by 93-94, okay, Isaiah Thomas was only 32 years of age before he ruptured his Achilles tendon near towards the final week of the season. That pretty much ended his career. Now, if Isaiah made the courageous decision to come back a la of Dominique Wilkins, okay, he would have been 33 years of age, and that would have paved the way for the 94 draft when they basically drafted Grant Hill. All right, so the course of that year, okay, they drafted those two young guys of Lindsey Hunter and Allan Houston. And in the 94 draft, obviously they drafted the third pick with Grant Hill, who's now in the Hall of Fame. Think about this for a moment. You still had Joe Dumars, who by that pretty period of time was entering to his 30s, okay? Joe Dumars was actually exactly 30 years old. And he pretty much had no problem accepting a bench role, okay? Because there were many times where Joe Dumars could have been traded elsewhere. I know that the Bulls wanted to trade for Joe Dumars during that 93-94 year to get another shooter in that two-guard position, but nothing was ever going to happen from that point forward. But Joe Dumars was going to still be around. And honestly, you guys, to really think about it, Joe Dumars, made two all-star teams and wasn't doing that bad. All right. I know 94, 95, Grant Hill's rookie year, he did let him in scoring, but Joe Dumars was second in the team in scoring, averaging 18 points per game. And in terms of a 3-point percentage, he shot 30%. Not too bad, you know what I mean, considering the fact that he was accepting more of a bench role and averaging 38 minutes per game. But you fast forward to the 96-97 season with Joe Dumars, okay? Joe Dumars was at his another All-Star appearance, his last one in 97, and he was second in the team and scored, averaging 14.7 points per game, and was shooting exactly 43% from the three-point line. Really, really efficient years, even though he was no longer the main focus at that time. Okay. Now, if Isaiah would have decided to stay in Detroit and would have recommitted to coming back for another year, I think that he would have been really, really been instrumental of helping the maturity of both Grant Hill and Allan Houston. Because remember, Allan Houston was going to be the next 1-2 punch with Grant Hill, if you really think about it. This is before Allan Houston, took when his free agency deal was almost over, his rookie deal, and went to the Knicks. So do you think about this for a moment? You could have had Allan Houston and Grant Hill as your two main core players. You would have had the two veteran players of Joe Dumars and Isaiah Thomas still at the fold, teaching those two guys. And then at your front line, they also drafted Theo Ratliff too, who ended up being a really good shot blocker too. So think about this for a moment. You had Theo Ratliff, who was pretty much going to be an excellent shot blocker, okay? You had Allan Houston at the two guard, who was going to be a great shooter and average and very efficient scorer. You had the all-around brilliance of Grant Hill at your disposal. You had Joe Dumars off your bench. And if Isaiah decided to come off the bench, that would have been nice, but I think he would have still been starting. You also had Lindsey Hunter, who was also a defensive specialist and a good three-point shooter too. So they really had good pieces around that team that would have made them a difference. Now, the big difference was going to be from the front line. Now, Don Reid was the last guy selected in the 95 draft. And Don Reid didn't do too bad. You know what I mean? He had a really good, decent career. But I think looking back from that Detroit side of things here, okay, as I look at the 95, draft, they drafted Theo Ratliff, who was a good pick, and Randolph Childress. Not too bad picks, but they could have maybe gone better, maybe taking a chance to get Greg Ostertag, a guy that could probably play the 7-footer and probably would have been a good shot blocker too. You weren't going to be counting on Greg Ostertag to be your post scorer. That wasn't going to happen. But I think him would have probably made have been a decent pick, but that's just up for debate. But also, in terms of free agents that they would have looked at, Otis Thorpe was a good free agency signing, even though he was at an advanced age at that period of time. I think that Brian Williams, who was a free agent in 97 before the Bulls claimed him, I think if he would have helped him and get himself into shape, I think that he would have really been instrumental in terms of getting the Pistons over the hump of that first round series against Atlanta. You know what I'm saying? So I think that there have been a lot of good possibilities, but the core players would have been Lindsey Hunter, Grant Hill, and Theo Ratliff, and those guys. Those three main core players were going to be your main young players that you had to basically develop, okay? And don't forget, you also had Aaron Mckie in the mix here too, who was not bad of a player coming off your bench. Who was a future sixth man of the year in 2001 with the Philadelphia 76ers. So you had all those guys that could have been instrumental of helping reconstruct the Pistons into probably another powerhouse. You know what I mean? Think about this for a moment. If Allan Houston and Grant Hill would have been matured and ready to go against those Chicago Bulls, you would have had another chapter of that Chicago-Detroit rivalry, but probably a little bit different in the sense that Detroit was the up-and-coming team, while the Bulls were pretty much the team that they had to go through, almost in a way where it was basically a reversal of what happened during the late 80s and early 90s, when the Bulls were the team that had to go past Detroit to get where they wanted to go in terms of winning the championships. So that would have been very, very interesting to see. I think that Pistons team would have probably gotten over the Charlotte Hornets, because by that time Zoe and Larry Johnson were pretty much didn't co-sync well together. You know what I'm saying? The Magic would have been still a major team and pretty much in the mix. You had Indiana, you had New York. I think by that time New York was slowly regressing because the players were pretty much done with Pat Riley And, there were a lot of players on that Knicks team that were just getting fed up with, the antics of Pat Riley, and Pat Riley wanted more control of that Knicks team, and he was never going to get it. So all these things to consideration, the Pistons really had decent open opportunities to make some moves and make a run in the Eastern Conference. Now, who decides to coach the team? That's going to be the tough part. Now, I did talk about how Doug Collins took over the team after Don Chaney during the 95-96 campaign. He coached that team for 3 years. Here's my thing with Doug Collins. Doug Collins, as good of a coach as he is, Doug Collins was way too invested. He was way too over emotional when it comes to basketball. You saw it during the Bulls documentary of The Last Dance. You notice how Doug Collins did not want to answer why he was basically replaced in place of Phil Jackson. It was very simple. One, he didn't want to institute the triangle offense as Tex Winter was suggesting to the team. Two, Doug Collins' system was just too dependent on Michael Jordan having the ball in his hands a lot and letting him be the decision maker. Three, he wasn't giving the young players opportunities to grow and to develop into those roles that ultimately were going to play the key factors in that first three-peat team. I'm talking about Horace Grant and Scottie Pippen. So you fast forward to when he was in Detroit, okay? The Detroit team, didn't do too bad in 95-96. They made the playoffs. They made the playoffs as a 7th seed and ultimately got swept in the first round by the Orlando Magic. You know what I'm saying? And they didn't do too bad. They won 46 regular season games. The next year, however, they made a splash. Early on in that 97 year, the Pistons were among the top 3 teams in the Eastern Conference. But then they went through a pretty much a bad spell in the second half of the season. And one of those reasons was that the players' relationship with Doug Collins was deteriorating. As I told you guys before about one of my videos I did about Doug Collins, there was one particular game in 97. They were in Utah. And Otis Thorpe, who was their starting power forward at that time, was matched up against Karl Malone. Malone had 41 points. Guess how many points Otis Thorpe had? 0. And Otis Thorpe was pretty much at his wit's end because he felt like he wasn't involved in the offense, and he felt that the antics and the over emotional instability of Doug Collins was really rubbing off the players the wrong way. Even though Grant Hill supported him initially, eventually over time, even Grant Hill started to get tired of the antics. That's one of the reasons why the Pistons lost in the first round series against Atlanta, because they were pretty much playing for themselves. They weren't necessarily playing for Doug Collins. That's one of the reasons why they were so out of the gate in 97, 98 and failed to make the playoffs. So, with all that being considered, okay, one of the coaches I would have had a chance to maybe gun for, I would have thought about bringing back Chuck Daly as a coach again, because remember, Chuck Daly was pretty much was basically a broadcaster for Turner Sports between 95 through 97, but he hadn't made up his mind if he wanted to really return back to the old ground of coaching. But if Isaiah and Dumars would have been the guys that would have convinced him to come back, I think we'd have had no problem coming back to Detroit. Now, if you really want me to say, well, who would be another coach that it would probably be another guy that they could probably lean to? Well, I really thought about this, and you can put your input in. You can debate this if you want to. I would have taken a chance and called up the New York Knicks and asked them, hey, do you think Mr. Jeff Van Gundy would be interested in coaching the team? Maybe just contact the Knicks and ask them if they would be interested in just opening up a job interview with Jeff Van Gundy, because Jeff Van Gundy was pretty much going to be the next coach in line to take over that team after Don Nelson, and he didn't do a too bad job as a coach of the Knicks either. So that's another example. Maybe by that time, maybe Pat Riley, that would have been a guy that you could have went after too, because pretty much at that time, Pat Riley was pretty much done in New York because he wanted more control of the team, as I said, but wasn't going to get it. That's one of the reasons why he took the Miami job with both head coach and general manager positions. So to take that back, I don't know if Pat Riley would have want to accept that kind of role. So that's another possibility, and maybe the possibility of Don Nelson, but I don't know if Don Nelson's system would have worked well for that specific Detroit team. So those are some of the possibilities that I kind of think of when it comes to coaches. But the Pistons by that time, didn't do too bad in terms of, basically of drafting, in terms of, building up a team. The problem is that they didn't have the right amount of horses to really get them over. And losing Allan Houston was one of the first ones that pretty much was pretty much the straw that broke the camel's back. Then after that, Del Collins left, and then Brian Williams, retired prematurely because he felt like he didn't want to prove anything in basketball anymore. And then after that, in 2000, Grant Hill, broke his ankle and tried to play through it and was never the same player again, and then left as a free agent and a sign-in trade with Orlando. So all these things in consideration, I think that if things would have been done a little bit differently in terms of maybe coaching staff and maybe in terms of player contract management, I think the Detroit Pistons of the 90s maybe would have had a good opportunity to maybe get for a run against the Chicago Bulls, but they would have had to really develop fast if they were going to have a chance, because by that time the Bulls were just at their top peak and nobody was going to stop them. You know what I'm saying? So that's just my opinion on the matter. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section.